Okay, folks, we're back. So we spent the first video talking all about before getting pregnant, during pregnancy, post-pregnancy, all that stuff. And please be advised, the amount of time that we spend on that is proportionate to the amount of time that women should be spending on their nutrition before, during, and after pregnancy. So it's a big deal. It's really important. Okay. Well, now we can move on. Now that we've been born, we still got to eat. So let's talk about some of the specifics. I mean, we spent this whole semester talking about dietary guidelines for an adult. And for the most part, children, school-aged, elderly, I mean, the guidelines don't change that much. We need carbs, fat, and protein. We need our micronutrients. So the basic playbook doesn't change a whole lot, but there are some considerations. So our starting baseline for this whole discussion is going to be the well-balanced diet that we've talked about for healthy adults. And as we go through each of these age groups, then we'll talk about some of the specific considerations that might differ from that baseline well-balanced diet for a healthy adult. Just ignore that for me. Thank you. Let's try and keep it simple. It's not rocket science, folks. Right? Keep it simple. Okay. I know, it's kind of fun to find pictures. So infants, right? Infants are growing real fast. Infants have the fastest growth rate. So out of all of these times in our lives, infants have the fastest growth rate. Crazy. Look, double birth weight by about 6 months. So if you were born at 10 pounds, by 6 months, you're going to be 20 pounds. Tell me, at what other point in your life do you double your body weight in 6 months? I mean, I know because a little infant is so small, we may not really appreciate how much work is going on in that infant's body. But to double your weight in 6 months' time, that body is doing a lot of developing. Infants need a lot of calories, right? Infants need a lot of calories. I'm not going to ask you any specific numbers, but I just wanted to give you some numbers for an example. So what you do need to know is that infants need a lot of calories because they're growing. They're going to double their birth weight by 6 months in most cases. An example of some numbers, 108 calories per kilogram of body weight for the first 6 months. Let's talk about me. I'm 150 pounds. That would equal 7,344 calories. I can assure you I do not ingest that many calories. I probably ingest that many calories over 3 days' time. So I'm not going to ask you this number, but I just wanted to give you an example to give to you the scope here, right? Here's some other specifics if you're interested, but you don't need to know those. Suffice to say, my friends, infants, because they have the fastest growth rate out of all of our time being alive, they need a lot of calories. What are some of the additional things that infants need to be thinking about? Vitamin K and vitamin D. Iron is also important. A lot of times iron can be brought into the baby through an iron-enriched cereal. I mean, Cheerios, folks. We probably all had parents who did that. Put us in a little chair there with Cheerios, and we went at it. But I am going to ask you about vitamin K and vitamin D. You don't need to know the why. You can read about the why. Vitamin D, we don't get enough vitamin D in the breast milk. So that's important. When that baby is really young, it's not a good idea to bring in vitamin D through milk. Their body cannot process it, so drops tend to be the best way to get it into their system. And similarly, vitamin K, it plays a role in helping our digestive tract develop some good bacteria. And that's usually injected. See, these are things that your doctor would all do to help you, but You just need to know vitamin K and vitamin D are important for infants. Okay, anything outside of that is not necessarily needed. I certainly wouldn't recommend supplements. I would recommend that we get these things through milk or formula and solid foods at around 6 months of age. So there's an idea, and everyone's different, folks, but this just gives us a ballpark. In most cases, it is safe to begin to introduce solid food around 6 months. Prior to that, the digestive tract is not developed enough to handle it. There's not a healthy enough immune system to handle some of the bacteria that might come in through this food. So 6 months is a healthy, usually around there is healthy. Here's some tips. Sometimes for some infants, introducing solid food can be a challenge. Definitely some things should be avoided. Do I have it on the next slide? No. Even though it's not circled, I do want to point it out here. Honey, right? For those infants, especially that first 6 months, even up to a year, we don't want to bring in honey because it may contain botulism, and because the infant's immune system is not developed well enough, it could kill them. So watch out for honey. You don't want to bring those in. Additionally, egg whites, peanut butter, it's kind of interesting. Peanut butter, we think of as such a great thing, and it is, but because of its contents, 6 months or younger, or in that first year even, peanut butter is not a good idea. Okay, let's talk about young children. So this category tends to go from about ages 1 to 5. The previous thing we just talked about was infants, was a year and under, right? So everything here was a year and under. Once we get to 1 to 3 is about our toddler years, and then we get our preschool years. We're going to classify this as the toddlers and the preschoolers as young children. They are still growing quite a bit. They're still growing quite a bit, but we're never going to be growing as fast as we did when we were infants. We're never going to be doubling our body weight every 6 months. That's ridiculous. So still growing, still need to eat a lot, but not growing as quite of a fast rate. Toddlers are really active. Here's an idea of how many calories a toddler should be bringing in. If you know anything about toddlers, that can be hard to get it in them. It's hard to sit them down for that long of a time. So be trying to give them food often. They're still growing. Things to worry about are choking hazards. Raw vegetables should not be given to kids 4 and under. What are some additional needs for this 1 to 5-year-old age group? Calcium and iron. And now we can bring these things in through cow's milk, through fortified cereals, etc. Calcium is needed because we got to lay down those strong bones and have enough calcium for nerve impulses and muscle contractions. Iron is really important. Iron plays a role in our ability to form hemoglobin on the red blood cell surface to transport oxygen. So these are our 2 important things during this age group. And additionally, vitamin D and fiber. Vitamin D is really important for that bone health as well. And you might not think about fiber, but now's the time when we have to start to get things moving through that GI tract. At these ages, we're bringing in more solid foods, more different kinds of foods, and we have to make sure that while we do that, at the same time, we bring in some fiber to help move things through the GI tract. It's not just old people that need fiber. Ha ha ha. Some things that might be happening during this time, picky eating is really common. These are some suggestions that have come from resources I've read. A lot of this oftentimes falls back to parenting style and technique, which I would never tell you how to be a parent. But here's what the resources tell me what to do. But it can be a little bit challenging. Okay, so now we're moving into school-age children. So now we're ages 6 plus. So according to this, everything from 6 up until pre-adolescence. It is in the school-aged. Once they start going to school, or they're of an age where they're socializing more, they really begin to develop patterns. As an infant or a toddler, they're not going to be as attuned to these dietary patterns. But once we get to these school-age children, even if they don't seem so, they're really going to start to notice what's going on, particularly model behavior of those around them. So it's particularly important during these school-age years to set a good example because you're developing patterns. And as we know, patterns are really hard to break, especially if you've been eating or living one way for 20 years. It's really hard to go back and break them. There are no specific guidelines for the school-age children. They do need to have a sufficient amount of calories. This should have many well-balanced meals throughout the day, in current moderation. Okay, pretty straightforward. As I already said, this is where we're going to start to have patterns develop. This is where the kid is going to more and more want to be like the older people around them. And that includes wanting to eat what their parents eat. So it's important to serve as a good role model. You can read about the school lunches. I'm not going to ask about them. A lot of times they're not very healthy. My suggestions are to pack a school lunch when possible. It's cheaper, more healthful. But there you go. Okay. Here are some federal guidelines. These have been updated. It tends to become a political thing, which I don't necessarily understand why. But such as it is, I'm not going to ask you about this. School-age children, this is also where we start to see obesity rearing its ugly head, right? So this is when we might start to see, just ignore that for me, this is where we might start to see a trend towards gaining weight. And this is before puberty, right? And what we do know is people who grow up obese have a much more difficult time losing that weight later in life. So these patterns that we develop in these school-age children in eating and lifestyle are so important. Here are some statistics about obesity. I already went through this in one of the other chapters, but it's not good. Okay, now let's get to adolescence. So now we're probably talking about 13. Women tend to go through puberty earlier than men, but here's where the body is really going to start to change. Things get more complicated socially. People are trying to figure out their personality and figure out what they want to do in life, who they want to be in life. And at the same time, hormones are going crazy. So it's a tough time, right? So here we're going to have the growth spurt, puberty. We still need more calories. The body's getting bigger. We're still growing. Growth has not stopped. As a matter of fact, the onset of puberty is going to release hormones that are going to cause even more growth. So we need more calories still. We haven't yet reached our peak calorie intake. What are some of the specific needs? Calcium and iron continue to be important. Iron particularly because when a woman gets her period, she starts to lose blood every month. It's important to replenish the iron. Be on the lookout. This is when we might start to see some disordered eating. We'll be talking about that maybe in this chapter. Can't remember. It's a tough time, I would say, particularly with young girls who, for women, when they go through puberty, all of a sudden they have a huge uptick in estrogen. And estrogen, as a hormone, tells the body, lay down more fat. Because, up to about age 10, physiologically, boys and girls are pretty similar. They have different parts, right? Different organs, reproductively. But in terms of their overall physiology, very similar. It's not until puberty hits when men get that huge testosterone hit and they start to get bigger, faster, stronger. Women get that hit of estrogen, which causes them to lay down more fat. Because, of course, it's preparing the body for inevitably bearing a child. So it's really hard as a woman. I mean, I'm a woman. As a girl, when you turn 12 or 13, all of a sudden fat starts to lay down, even though you don't change your diet. So it can be absolutely understandable why a woman or a girl in this age category would have some disordered eating. But this is a part of growing up. Yes, women are going to have more body fat. That's the way it goes. But it's also important to remember that these changes during puberty are not going to last forever. That uptick in estrogen doesn't keep going up and up and up. It goes up, and then it steadies off. But it will get a little better, is my point. Okay, now we're in late adolescence, early adulthood. Let's say 18 to 20 plus. Think about college age. Now we're no longer in high school. College age, or getting your first job out of high school. This is where we reach our peak caloric need. Usually in your early to mid-20s. Sooner for women than men. This is the most calories you'll ever need in your life. Enjoy it while you can, folks. There are no secrets for these adults. We've already talked about it. The whole semester thus far, we've been giving dietary recommendations for a healthy adult. Now, what about older? Couple notes here. As medicine advances, the lifespan of individuals advances, and people are living longer and longer. And that can be difficult, right? It's difficult to fuel the body as it gets older and older and older. So older adults, and it's not just the elderly folks, older adults could mean middle age plus, they need fewer calories. They've already reached their peak caloric needs. So they need fewer calories, but not less nutrition. So you got to take the same principles of carbohydrates, fat, protein, and micronutrients, the same principles, and just downsize it. Instead of being a 2,500 calorie diet, now it's maybe a 2,100 calorie diet. Additional needs, fiber and fluids. Fiber is really important. As the body gets a little bit older, more wear and tear on it, it's a little bit more difficult to push things through the digestive tract. Fiber helps. And fluids. It also becomes more difficult to maintain hydration. Here's some other considerations. None of them are read, so you don't need to know them. But these are things that should be at least considered for a healthy older adult. Older adults also need more zinc and calcium often, but these are not in red, so you don't need to know it. Here's kind of a summary. I'm not going to ask anything specifically from this, but this is another resource for you. Okay. Unfortunately, when I put this on my iPad to record this, this got a little bit uneven. Basically, in one side, so from here over, I list a condition or disease, and then to the right of it, I list some things with nutrition that can help maybe prevent that disease, but also lessen its consequences. I'm not going to ask you this, but I think that it's really important to talk about. When you go to see a doctor, unfortunately, it's not often talked about that much, nutrition, but it should be. So just food for thought, and I meant that literal pun. Okay, as someone gets older, or just in general too, there's other challenges, It's easy to say to someone, eat your fruits and vegetables, but maybe there are economic challenges to that. Maybe there's not access to a supermarket with healthy fruits and vegetables. Emotional challenges, particularly now that we're after COVID, it's been a really tough time, so it's hard. Food is something that's readily available for most people, so it's an easy thing to turn to. And of course, cannot forget that all of these guidelines have to be taken in accordance with someone's health conditions. A certain health condition may change the guidelines. All right, that was just the basics. I wish I could discuss more, but now you have some idea. All right, great job, folks. See you next time.